how Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and Norway could do their plans on energy transition and on our guides on how we can help them to do that. I'm Helena Espiritus. I'm from WWF. I'm the global lead in oil and gas transition. And with me, I have Shirley Metzton. And she's going to explain a little bit about the project that we are doing together with those countries and why we chose those countries and how we are planning to do this guidance. And then afterwards, we're going to have a panel discussion on a little bit on the NDCs from these countries and how civil society could help to enhance those NDCs. So it's a pleasure to have you here on the Brazil Day in Panda Hub. So thank you very much. Shirley, would you like to?
Thanks, Helena. So nice to see you all. Hi, everybody. So like Helena said, my name is Shirley. I work for WWF. I'm the Global NDC Enhancement Coordinator. And as part of my role, I lead in the UNFCCC space on global stocktake, on NDCs, all of these issues. We came out collectively as a team very excited after the decision last year at COP28, what came out of the global stocktake and the specific language around fossil fuels. This was a really big thing for us. And WWF in general, we've been working on NDC enhancement for at least the last 6 years and working on how to enhance across all areas. We do focus holistically on NDC ambition, also across various specialist work streams on energy, on nature, and on food systems. So this is very much like linked into the work that we're doing on energy. We work here on fossil fuel phase out and also on just energy transition. I'm here just to give a little introduction. I'm not the main event at all, but okay, yeah. What I wanted to do was to just talk a little bit about what we're doing. So you see here we have our NDC we want checklist, which is really a little bit like the characteristics that we like to see in NDCs. For WWF, what we like to see is progression. So we want to see that with each iteration of the NDC, it's moving in the right direction, it's moving enough in the right direction. And as part of this, we look across 5 key areas, which I've listed there. So not just looking at mitigation ambition, but looking across various other aspects. And I already indicated that we're working on just transition. This is one of our areas. Inclusiveness and participation, really important area, linking to the SDGs, for example. So we have a holistic understanding of ambition and where we'd like it to go. In this project, like Helena said, we're working across Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, and Norway, looking at the fossil fuel phase out within NDCs. And there's a couple of interesting things about it. First of all, these NDCs are on very different timelines. Everybody will have seen last week that Brazil has submitted its NDC already. Colombia and Mexico are working hard on theirs, and as well as Norway, we're expecting them to come sort of staged throughout 2025. So we are engaging it in different sort of points across this development phase. Secondly, we're looking at the countries which we think are the most important in the region for fossil fuel phase out, specifically thinking about production. So it may seem strange that we've got 3 countries from South America and then we've chosen Norway, but there's some really interesting links we can see across these, and having a joined up discussion I think can be really, really helpful. So this is why we're sort of working in these areas. And in terms of what we're doing is we think about what our role is as civil society in WWF. And we also work across, like I said, these other areas in a similar way. But in terms of what we can do to help governments in developing their NDCs, this is a nationally determined process. So it's very much rooted in what makes sense on the ground in this specific country. And we have some great teams in each of these countries engaging at the national level on NDC enhancement. On the fossil fuel phase-out side, we are at the moment working on guidance on what we'd like to see in NDCs. This is coming out very soon as a publication after COP29. We've also already been engaging. So for example, in Brazil, my colleagues have been engaging on the narrative there. And the idea here is to say, okay, what is it that we can do to help countries think about fossil fuel phase-out in their NDCs, in their national context. So again, not being prescriptive, we have some good sort of ideas on what we'd like to see, but to think about as a framework what we'd like countries to think about throughout the development process. And then the next stage after this, which we're going to go on to next year, is thinking about what is WWF's role in implementing the NDCs, because we have some of the NDCs. We will be moving on to thinking about how to implement them. And here we're really thinking about our role could be in helping shaping the governance structure, thinking about what came out of the discussions last year in the global stocktake, that there are these challenges and barriers, and fossil fuel phase out is a massive systemic change, is a big, big challenge. So we want to explore that. We want to provide some support to governments to really have that discussion at the national level. And across both of these elements, like I said, our offices are already engaging at the national level and will continue to do that to help us create a framework which we believe can work for other countries as well. So that's a little bit on what we're doing, but I think the more interesting discussion is coming up about the national level discussions. So I hand back to you, Helena.
Thank you so much, Shirley. And I do think you are the main event, and I really think that checklist is really incredible. So I really thank you for all your work on this. So now I would like to thank you and welcome to the stage my other friends that were involved in this project. So I would like to invite Ricardo Fuji. He's from WWF Brazil. He's the leader in energy transition, and he's representing the rest of the team that is watching us from home, from their countries. And Shirley, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to ask you. Yes, I'm sorry. We work a lot together, so I think we are always very cozy together talking about things. I would like to invite as well, representing the Brazilian government. So thank you very much, Mariana Spessi, if you could join me in the stage as well. She's the special advisor to the ministry, for the Ministry of Minas and Energias. Thank you. Oh, sorry, that was Portuguese. I didn't realize. For Mines and Energy. That's what happens when you speak Portuguese and trying to think in English. Anyway, then representing Norway, I would like to welcome Matilda. She's climate policy advisor in the Norwegian Church 8, and also representing the CSOs in Norway and thinking about their NDCs. And from Colombia, I would like to welcome Margarita Gutierrez. She's a policy advisor at Technopolis and IISD, and also thinking about how to do the NDCs for Colombia. And I'm really, really happy to have this formation here. This is exactly what we want to see on NDCs. We want to see a participatory approach on how to do them. So all people from different parts of society should be together trying to think about this process. So I'm really happy that you guys are here with me. I'm going to start with questions all around. I will have 2 questions for each of you, and then we are going to go for questions for the audience. Fuji, I'm going to start with you. I would like you to talk a little bit about this project and about the challenges of defining and implementing a just energy transition away from fossil fuels.
Yes. Thank you, Helena. I'm Ricardo Fuji. I'm the energy transition leader at WWF Brazil. And that's a very interesting subject because in the past, you used to think of energy in a totally different way we do today. Due to the climate change, we changed not only the way we plan and implement our energy matrix, but also the deployment and the planning process itself. So it's not an energy transition, but also a planning transition. In the past, we used to focus a lot on security of supply and affordability. It was the two main pillars in energy planning. We usually did forecasts on demand, then we considered the alternatives, the technically viable, feasible ones. You run analysis and scenarios about costs and risks, and that was it. Either the process might be much more government focused or even more private sector led. Either way, the planning was pretty much that, focused on the demand and the alternatives for supply, considering security and affordability. Due to the climate change, we had to change it, not only to consider a net zero matrix that we really need to reach, but also is starting to take more seriously. In some sense, it was somehow a parallel process, but consider other aspects, social, environmental, local aspects, global aspects, economic aspects, and political aspects in the planning process, making it a multi-criteria problem and a much more complex one. Before, it usually was led by the technocracy and specialists from the governments, from the energy companies, but now it involves a lot of actors, stakeholders from other sectors. And it's interesting because I think even though with the climate negotiations and the first round of NDCs, I used to hear that from people, especially those involved with the climate negotiation, oh, wow, we have our NDCs either from Brazil or other countries, so we have our plan. And being a person from the energy sector related to energy planning, that doesn't make any sense for me. I don't see people in the energy planning process considering NDCs as much as other aspects. That process, it was a long way. It is changing. I think this last round of NDCs, and Brazil has just published our NDC. The gap's closing. Uh, in some sense, all those criteria and stakeholders are considering our recent release NDC, which I found very good. However, I must say that in some sense I feel a bit disappointed that we don't have smart targets, especially when it comes to measurable and time constrained targets. And that not only the case of the Brazilian indices, but pretty much all the indices that we see around, particularly when it comes to energy targets. Uh, and why I found it that we should have that either on NDC itself, possibly, desirably, but also in the other mechanisms and documents and plans that our countries must have and develop. Because it's very important to entrepreneurs and the private sector uh, acknowledge the signals that will lead them to invest and sink their resources on a long-term project. And in the case in Brazil, we are fortunate enough that we have plenty of renewable resources. Those are much affordable in most cases, but we'll have to make hard choices in the long way. You have to consider how we phase out our fossil fuels. We still have some coal in our energy matrix, a lot of oil and gas, but we have biofuels. That's something very particularly that we have. We are the second largest producer of biofuels in the world, second only to US. And it's very important to our matrix. But what are the signals that we send to entrepreneurs? Certainly, we can signal them to stimulus, incentives, subsidies, but the blanket is only too short because we can stimulus everything. So the solution, we also have to inhibit some solutions, some alternatives. In this case, usually those related to fossil fuels. So, concluding my considerations, uh, I think it's very important that all the NDCs and the next steps of the countries considers in signals and defines clear targets to the energy solutions, and then the policies can unfold from them. And that's pretty much it. Thank you, Helena.
Thank you very much, Fuji, and thank you for going a little bit into details on the difficulties of doing the NDCs, because we all know that it's not an easy task, but it's a task that we all have to do together. So it's really is really that's why we are doing guidances. That's why we are doing toolkits, because we want to help countries to have the most ambitious NDCs that they can. And as we are talking about Brazil, I would like to ask Mariana. So, as Fuji was saying, Brazil has a competitive advantage in transitioning to renewables, and that advantage comes from its large share of renewables in the energy matrix, which is roughly 50% already, and the fact that bioenergy, wind, solar, and hydro industries are already established and plenty of potential to deploy new projects at a lower cost than most countries. What role could Brazil assume in assisting other countries to develop their energy transition on plans?
Okay, thank you so much for the question, Elena, and it's a pleasure to be here talking on behalf of the Brazilian government and representing the Ministry of Mines and Energy of Brazil in this debate. We really believe that countries will advance in their energy transitions if they are supported by having national policies, programs, and well-designed regulatory framework to attract investments and also to give the proper signal to entrepreneurs, markets, but also to engage different levels of participation in this process. And I think here in this point, Brazil can contribute a lot because we have a tradition on having energy planning from medium, long-term, and also short-term perspectives that facilitates this decision-making while thinking about the energy resources that we can use, in which time framing, in which speed, and how can we contribute to this process in terms of unveiling the perspectives that we have in our country. Fortunately, Brazil has a huge amount of renewable resources, as Ricardo was mentioning, but planning the optimum utilization of them is not an easy thing to do. We have now a lot of difficult, tough choices coming up right ahead of us because we are talking about adding more solar PV plants and also wind farms in our country, which brings a different level of challenge when we talk about designing the system of the future, the grid of the future. So right now we are discussing, for example, how can we bring more flexibility, more support to have these load peaks in our countries, and we are now shifting the discussions and the debate into the aspect of energy security, which is something that is of special concern for every country. But we really believe that only by having those governance well set, policies, and also the right instruments to put in place will be possible for countries to go through the possibilities that we have. This year, as you might all have followed, we have hosted G20, and we have brought these discussions under the G20 Energy Transitions Working Group, where we have brought actually the energy planning and how it contributes to de-risk investments for renewables and new technologies as a key element, for example, for increasing access to financing, and we are way behind on what is needed in this sense. So we counted on the support from different international organizations, such as the International Energy Agency, that has prepared a special report that was launched last week here in Baku, showing that we need a lot of investments in energy transition and to clean technologies to advance. And most part of these investments will come from private sector. So private sector should be part of this conversation. And as enablers, governments are enablers of this process, we should be thinking about how to engage, but not forgetting to engage civil society, not forgetting to engage different levels of stakeholders into these discussions, because we should not see energy transition as a mere process of technological replacement. We should assume the complexity of this process to have proper outcomes. And here, in our case in Brazil, we are facing the side effects of that. For example, we have increased our installed capacity for renewables, for example, but many of these projects are not engaging properly with the local communities, the affected communities, and it has been raising some social conflicts, for example, in our country, in our territory, and this should not happen. So there are many things that we need to change, and without having the proper engagement, this is not going to be possible. So we have brought this topic, and also to share some of these great experiences on dealing with an energy portfolio and what to do with all the sources and the policy making process. We have proposed during the Energy Transitions Working Group agenda the launch of the Global Coalition for Energy Planning, and we are going to count on the support of the IRENA to facilitate this process. And our idea is to use this as a platform to share some knowledge, especially with developing economies, so that we can, uh, to have these moments of identifying which could be the best modeling process, the best governance that governments could implement at the national and different levels of organization, so that they can also move forward and not depend only on some plans that some stakeholders prepare to them, but for them to have the autonomy of proposing country-led energy planning and energy transition to this next round of NDCs to be effective in terms of implementation. This is what we see that is going to be crucial for this next step. So you can count on Brazil, because we are going to be hosting, the secretariat of this group for the next 2 years, and more is about to come in terms of details on how it's going to work. And we are really excited to be part of this moment and also to facilitate this process for many countries.
Thank you very much. And thinking about that COP30 is going to be in Brazil, I'm pretty sure that we are going to keep hearing quite a lot about Brazil and how you're thinking about NDCs and planning for the future. And thinking about that Brazil already presented their NDCs. In the case of Norway, Mathilde, the Norwegian government made a decision to miss the deadlines. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that reaches? Yes, okay. So the Norwegian government made a decision to miss the deadlines for their NDCs to try to ensure a democratic and political consensus. How do you see that decision, and do you find it important?
Yeah, do you want?
Yeah.
So our government has been in government for over 3 years. We have known that the deadline for submitting NDCs was like 9 months before COP for I don't know how long, since the Paris Agreement or something, at least more than 3 years. I think it's very disappointing, and it says something about the planning of Norway that we were not able to have a democratic process earlier. The opposition parties and parliamentarians have been asking for more discussion on climate policy in Parliament. It has been denied, which is also very undemocratic, by the government and the minister for both last semester before summer and also this semester. So of course I agree that it's nice to have a democratic process. We should have a democratic process, and it's nice if we are able to get more or less a consensus on the NDC that we submit. It's important for our integrity as well if we change government and other parties are in place. But they knew this. They would be able to do this before. And the thing that's a bit unfortunate for Norway is that we have elections, state elections in September next year. So the fact that we're probably going to submit this NDC like around June maybe before the summer is really problematic, because it's going to be in the kind of run up to the elections for all of the parties. So the parties are maybe not going to have the most long-term perspective on this, but going to have more a 3 months perspective on what do we say to be elected, And right now in Norway, and I think this is the case for other countries, it's not the best environment for long-term climate planning. It's not what the voters are looking for. So it is probably a disadvantage for us that they will have this process all until summer next year.
Thank you very much. And something that we have been hearing here at COP is that the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement, it has to be something that is resilient and that it goes beyond parties and whose parties are in place, and that we have to prepare for that when we think about our NDCs. It cannot be just planning for the next 4 years, right, until the next election. We have to think about this in long term, and especially if we are thinking about energy transition and for the phase out of fossil fuels. So thinking about that, I would like to pass the word to Margarita. And thinking about the Colombian government took a stand on fossil fuels phase out, including a call on Amazon fossil free. And I wanted to know about you, what do you think are the next steps for implementing those calls through the NDCs?
Thank you for having me here. I think that there are 3 steps that are key in this moment. The first one is already the government doing, that is putting the planning of the reviewing of the previous NDC and understanding how has been achieved and why something has not been achieved. I think this is very useful to understand the progressivity and also if we wanted to go further. Additionally, they are using this public consultation to understand and to promote that people understand NDC. And they are using, with civil society, with private sector, and with people, with communities, they are receiving ideas on how to enhance the NDC and how to go further. This is a very important step. The second step, and I think that this one is the challenging one, is that we need to see the NDC beyond a collective list of goals and independent goals. I think that integrity and coherence and the systematic approach that you present is going to be needed if we wanted to phase out fossil fuels. And this is, for example, I have this example. We have a planning goal related to adaptation in the transportation sector that focus only on building resilience for roads. But what happened about the other modalities of transportation? For going to the Amazon, we only can go if you cross a river for 3 or more days, and you have to go by plane. So what kind of transportation do we need to design and include in that resilient plan? How we match together the low emission goals of the transport sector with the planning for resilience. I think this is something that it needs to be included and it needs to be reviewed in these sites. And the latest one, I think that we need to include co-benefits like health, avoided cost, and other information that make the people to embrace the NDCs and make the sectors embrace the NDCs. For example, the energy and the Ministries of Energy and Finance, with the support of the French Agency of Development, just recently launched a macroeconomic model that makes sense for the future economy of the country to phase out fossil fuels. But it's until this year, that it has been clear. And we need economic signals, and we need to understand and to be aware in the NDC's plan how to build this resilience is going to be good for the micro and microeconomic level for Colombia. Finally, I think that these 3 steps belong together, what you were saying at the beginning, that this need to be the roadmap, the blueprint for a transformation, for a systemic transformation of the sector and of the economy. And this is what we haven't seen in the NDCs. We need to go further the list of goals and make it a transformational roadmap for the countries.
That is a very good point, that we have to go through beyond the box ticking exercises. And I think it's really interesting that we could already see, only for these questions, how different the situation is in each country, how different it is for you to think about your plans for energy transition, how to accelerate fossil fuels phase out through your NDCs. But what all of those countries have in common is that they are all oil producing countries. So we do have our differences, but we have something very similar at the center of it. But thinking about what you said as well, that we have to think about all the differences and how do we plan for different sectors. Mariana, I would like to go back to you and thinking about that Brazil already presented their new NDCs here at COP29. And I can. There you go. Collaboration between countries already. So you already presented the NDCs and with overall targets for emission reductions. And we were thinking about a little bit more about the milestones and roadmaps for energy transition and transitioning away from fossil fuels. And I would like to see if you can think about what could be the hurdles for setting such targets. And because we just heard from civil society as well, kind of a double question, but I would like to know as well, what do you see the role of civil society in the plans for the NDCs?
Sure. It is also another very important question, and thank you for that. I think it's okay with the wire, so
I think we're
okay.
safe. It's good.
Yeah, the key challenge for Brazil for this next decade is to keep a high share of renewables in both electricity mix and also energy matrix during this next decade, while our country still has been in developing economically, and also our population is still growing. So it is quite challenging to have these aspects in perspective, and we have some modeling process, and we have many indications that yes, it is possible for Brazil to keep this high level of renewables for the next 10 years, but we are aiming now and moving towards in terms of policy making and designing this new stage for to start looking on the hard to abate sectors, because right now we have done a lot in our power mix, for sure, with almost 90% of our electricity grid composed by renewables. But we know that for industry and transport, this is still a challenge for us. And why so? Especially for the transport sector. Brazil has decided some decades ago to have road transport as the basis for our country. So we are deeply reliant on diesel, for example, for heavy load transportation and many other things. And the question that we usually do, what replaces diesel in terms of technology? It is, and also that gets it feasible for without many different levels of impacts in terms of the economic inflation, for example, and the cascade effects that it has into different parts of our economy. So we do expect to have an increasing activity of these road transportation for commodities, for many other types of services, and yes, it is challenging to think about it. So we have said last month we had the approval of the Fuels of the Future law, which is aiming at these specific hard to abate sector in the transport sector. We are aiming at new solutions that might help decarbonize hard to abate sectors for the transport in Brazil. But it will depend in many different levels of implementation. We still need to design the infra-legal regulatory framework to get clarity on how things are going to be. So, but we have established important aspects that will bring up to the Brazilian energy matrix the possibility of having higher shares of, especially green diesel, biodiesel, biomethane actually, sorry, and these can be a game changer depending on how these can be implemented for these special vehicles. It can help to decarbonize, and we have some indications that it will reduce the level of our dependence on diesel. But it is still not possible to replace it all. So it is really challenging. And we are also taking some special look for some, usually not known aspects. So, for example, in the Amazon region, we have many remote communities that are usually being their energy supply is until now being made by diesel thermal plants. And we want to gradually replace them by having more hybrid projects, for example, coupling solutions such as solar PV with storage systems, which is something that we are still designing how things are going to be by designing some energy auctions specifically for these isolated systems in the Amazon region to gradually replace and reduce the emissions for our electricity mix in this case, but also to reduce the cost of energy because to get diesel into those areas in the Amazon, it's too expensive and it has a huge impact in our power grid. Anyway, we have many challenges because of the profile of our emissions and also some of these decision making that was from decades ago. But we are really also looking for some other new technologies, for example, for the industry sector, by also setting the national regulatory framework for hydrogen, green hydrogen, especially, and other colors of hydrogen that can be produced from biological sources such as ethanol, biomethane, and many other opportunities that Brazil can also showcase to the world. But we are still depending on many sort of technological development to advance. And I think this is going to be one of the key aspects that we should not overlook. And I think this is an important contribution that civil society can also bring to this debate. There is a lot of things that still needs to advance in terms of technology to make these technologies feasible and affordable. So I really see these as the key challenge for the next decades in terms of mobilization and also engagement from different levels of stakeholders, including academia, philanthropies, and many other, including the companies that operate in the energy landscape. We need to push them to invest in these new technologies, otherwise we are not going to move forward. And in the case of Brazil more specifically, we, for the very first time, and I'm very proud to say that because we have worked a lot to make it happen, we are going to have, we have established the National Policy for Energy Transition, where we have set two special instruments that will facilitate the implementation of the energy transition in our country. One of them is the National Energy Transition Plan, which will be the sectoral plan for energy in Brazil that will support the climate plan, which will have the whole of economy approach as we have an economy-wide NDC and so on. So, and for supporting these aspects, we have also established the National Forum for Energy Transition. We really believe that it is important to engage different levels of representatives from different stakeholders so that we can advance in this debate. And here I'm talking about civil society, social movements, labor unions, private sector, municipalities, which we know that are going to be hugely impacted for these policy choices from now on more and more. State governments, academia, anyway, a lot of different levels of representativeness, but that in our view, it's going to be crucial to showcase to the National Council for Energy Policy, wow, you are missing these aspects and this should be considered for the next 10 years, for example. And the National Energy Transition Plan should also take these aspects in terms of policy implementation. We need to design policies in this and this and that aspect because it is going to be needed. So we are really keen to have these forum fully operational next year. This year we have started to design its governance and how things are going to work. But our idea is to have these as the space for social dialogue and social engagement in Brazil.
Thank you very much. No, thank you very much. You touched into many subjects that I think are very interesting, especially here at COP. You talked about energy access that is super hard in Brazil, especially in the Amazon states. You talked about energy security and with affordable prices, about transport, how to try to make our transport more sustainable, and in transfer of technology. And here at COP is one of the things that we are discussing on how can developed countries help developing countries, how to do that, how can we exchange technologies, how can we together plan for us to be able to do this energy transition. And just to say that we know how hard it is, this process, so we really make ourselves available to try to help you as much as possible, be it with our NDCs checklist, but really to be here to exchange experiences and exchange knowledge to be able to help for us all together to get there. And thinking about the subject as well, Matilda, I would like to ask you, because last week when Brazil presented their NDCs, they presented as a range of emissions, and what I understand is that Norway was planning to do the same, so that they presented a target between 55 and 80% range on their NDCs, and that is being discussed, right, before being presented. And I wanted to understand, because I think that it was the Norwegian civil society that made that amendment, right, to add plans on the phase out of fossil fuels in their NDCs. And what do you think is the role of the Norwegian energy transition plan to try to reach that higher level of emission reductions? Yeah.
So what Norway has done is that they've presented this range, and then they've said we want input on what goal we should put within this range. And we criticized them very much for presenting a range going all the way down to 55%, because 55% is our goal for 2030. So it is, and in the Paris Agreement, you have to submit a better goal, right? And so the fact that we present a goal down to 55% for 2035, is that a signal that we are opening up for not doing anything between 2030 to 2035? That's not just disappointing, that is outrageous, right? And also adding to that, I mean, we have the science on how much emissions needs to be cut globally to have any chance at the 1.5 degree target, and the number for that is 57% by 2035. Norway is one of the richest countries in the world, that we are even open to discuss that the emissions we should cut in our country is less than the global average, is also outrageous, right? So I feel like this range that they've presented has done two things. First of all, is lowered the bar to under the floor, and second, it's also put kind of a cap on what we can discuss, because they only want input on something between the range. So the UK also presented their NDCs, and they said 81%. So should Norway not be able to match that then? Because we said, no, we only want input on up to 80%, right? So I think it's very concerning the way that they are kind of making the starting point for this discussion. But to your question, like you said, we think it's very clear that the NDCs needs to be a bit broader than only economy-wide emission targets, especially for developed countries who should go forward, right? And there's Simon Steele has encouraged countries to encourage to understand the NDCs as a bit broader, and other UN officials have also encouraged that. So that is why we think that Norway as a developed country should do more than just cut emissions that are strictly within our own borders. And that has many forms, that are many ways that we should do that. We think, I mean, there's been a general criticism of Europe and maybe the West in general that, okay, we're starting to cut emissions, but are we cutting emissions or are we just outsourcing emissions, right? When we are importing clothes, they are usually produced in other countries, often developing countries. So we get those products for free emission-wise, right? So we want Norway to as part of the NDC to also have a goal on how we can reduce consumption-based emissions in other countries. And actually, this is not just a civil society demand. This is also a place where we have the law behind this, because the European Human Rights Court ruled before the summer against a lawsuit against Switzerland on climate, that countries actually have to take responsibility for all the emissions they can impact. And Norway can impact the our imported emissions, right? We can put restrictions on that. So that is one aspect. And then to your question on exported emissions, right? Because Norway is a huge fossil fuel producer. Actually, we produce 3 times as much fossil fuels as Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan is really criticized at this COP for being a petrol state, but Norway is 3 times as big. So I would say the biggest impact Norway has on the world is not our emissions, and it's not even our outsourced emissions. It's actually the burning of fossil fuels that we profit on. So that's why we really want Norway to understand this responsibility that we have, and it might even be a legal responsibility under the Human Rights Convention, the EU one, and submit at least submit an intention to make a phase-out plan nationally. And this is what you say in such a phase-out plan. You could have stakeholders from different. You could have workers. You could have civil society. You could have different interests represented. And we're not requiring Norway to make a like perfect phase-out plan by February or June next year, but we are requiring them to understand this responsibility and submit an intention to make such a plan.
Those are very good points, and I think it's really important what you brought up about Scope 3 emissions and how we have to think about them as well when countries are thinking about their NDCs. You have to take all of this into consideration and make energy transition plan that makes sense for your reality. And yeah, so thank you for your passion and for keeping your country in line. It's always good to have like positive criticism to think about those processes. And Margarita, because I was looking at your pin from the CBD, and I was thinking that COP16 just happened in Cali, and I wanted to think about a little bit if you have those connections between when we think about nature and energy, and how do you think those could be expressed in the Colombian NDCs?
Sure, there are important connections, and we have been working on the NDC and NBSAP synergies. Many people is working on that in Colombia, starting for the government, GIZ, and all actors. And I think that from the analysis that we have been doing, I want to highlight 3 that are very related to phase out. We have like 30% of the NDC is connected to the goals for biodiversity in Colombia, but I want to highlight 3 of them. The first one, and it's a very important one, and it's a depth that we have, is the relationship and the management of the environmental liabilities of mining and oil producers. And we also need to understand what are going to be the liabilities related to other sources of energy and how we are going to manage that. I think this is very important. It's a goal on the NBSAF that we have to understand how these enterprises are going to affect or how they can proportion some opportunities for conserving and preserving the environmental integrity in Colombia. And this environmental integrity is not only about ecosystem, but it's also about resilience and capacities of the ecosystems to support the resilience and the adaptation capacity of the Colombians. The second one, and it's a very important, and it was very innovative when it came, is the ecosystem-based adaptation, progress, and commitment of the energy sector in Colombia. We have developed a very strong commitment of the energy sector in the NDCs related to how to implement ecosystem-based adaptation, and we need to develop further on that. We only have goals related to 1 project, 3 projects in the different plans, but we need to go further that and understand how ecosystem-based adaptation is going to be critical in the mega diverse countries. And also the last one, and is super related with the economic impacts, is that the mega diverse countries need to understand the capacities to diversification of the economic metrics. And we have some goals related to at 2030 reach 3% of the national GDP in bioeconomy, and half a million green employments. It's that enough to cover the phase out problems with jobs and economy? I think that we need to understand how these are going to be connected, and we need to put the pace together, because we cannot phase out the economy without building a bioeconomy, especially for mega diverse projects, countries. Sorry.
Thank you so much. And I think this is another thing that is a connection between the three countries, thinking about how nature is affected by energy production, be it in the Amazon or Arctic regions or in Colombia in so many ways. And yeah, and thinking about the climate and nature crisis caused by the burning of fossil fuels. So it's really important. But I'm gonna stop monopolizing your time only for myself because I'm loving this conversation. But I would like to open questions for the audience. I would like to see if there's any questions, or else I'm happy to monopolize your time.
Thanks, Dana. James Reela, I'm from South Africa, part of the WWF office there. We're doing some work on integrated energy planning, and you mentioned the importance of that for de-risking and for sort of attracting investment. And I think, you know, we also see it as a critical element, but there are those gaps that you end up identifying in that process. So we obviously, I think it probably then ends up being an iterative process, obviously, as new technologies come on board. But how do you factor that into your planning processes if you have to kind of do this and then redo it as things change?
Very important question, and we say that in Brazil, we have energy planning as every year it should be updated, because from one year to another things change. So what we do is to have a strong engagement with the different national agencies that take part in this process, so that we can, coordinate the information and set the standards, the trends, the possible pathways that we are going to be exposed to get all these new prospects reflected in our energy plan. So, for example, we have the National 10-year Energy Expansion Plan. It is published every year. It brings the perspectives for Brazil to the next 10 years, and it is updated every year so that we can have, this plan could concentrate the following up of the decision that were made by government in terms of policy. So we are establishing new framework for this fuel of the future, the hydrogen, and many other new policies in our country. And the basic aspect of this updating process is to see how far are we moving in terms of this implementation process. For example, in the Fuels of the Future law, we have established a mandate for having sustainable aviation fuels production in Brazil by setting a date for this to happen. So we usually do that to see and check if we are moving into the right direction or if something is missing in terms of implementation. So we do this updating every year, because every year we have energy auctions, we have transmission lines auctions, and to get all these prospects well reflected in these instruments. And we also have the National Energy Plan, which brings the long-term perspective for Brazil, and it is usually it is updated at each 5 years, so that we can have the prospects for the next 30 years to our country, and to see and check what are going to be next in terms of the energy resources that we have and we can explore, and also to showcase if what is needed to adopt new technologies. So, for example, for hydrogen, which is something that we still don't have large-scale hydrogen production in Brazil, but we have already mapped which are our possibilities, and This has, for example, provoked the creation of the National Hydrogen Program in our country. We have, for example, we have done some exercise in terms of mapping for the offshore wind potential in Brazil, and which could be the gaps and opportunities that we need to address if we decide to explore this technology for the next years, for example. So we have all these instruments very well connected to facilitate, but that's why we think that it's not only about having a plan. We need to have the institutions and the governance in terms of the government level, so that these aspects could be constantly updated and also reflecting the challenges and the opportunities that we have ahead of us. And one of the key topics that was really important for Brazil was that by having these established governance and instruments implemented, we could bring the National Development Bank to be part of this process. So what they have done was, well, I see that Brazil is preparing itself to have, for example, energy auctions to include wind and solar PV in the electricity mix. So what can I do to reduce the cost or reduce the risk for investments? So the National Development Bank was an important partner, and by having this planning connected to this de-risking from the financial institution, a very important one for Brazil, it was crucial for us to advance and to reach the current almost 90% of renewables in our electricity mix. In 2015, when we presented our first NDC, we had 74% of renewables in our electricity mix. So these advancements were possible because of this sort of instruments, and we are really keen to talk a little bit more to showcase how important it is. And one of the key examples, Brazil was an example, and Irina have prepared a report to showcase this case of success, and we are really keen and proud of having these in our country, and I think we can help others in this sense by having this positive experience in this regard. Thank you for your question.
Can I
Yes, please.
complement something on the risking? Because I think that it's important, super important for our countries that the just energy transition conversation is not just about renewables. And we need, in the risking arena, to understand also the importance of energy efficiency and small-scale solutions for agriculture, for example, and understand what are those other investments that we need to do, changing refrigerators in our houses, that make a good advance also, and that need to be reflected in the NDC and that are related to just transition.
I would like to thank you. Unfortunately, we are out of time, so I cannot have take another question from the audience, but I would like for us to keep this conversation offline. So if you would like to use the space and keep the conversation going, we can do that. But I would like to thank you very much for everyone speaking here today. Thank our team that is watching us from home in developing this project. Thank you, Fuji, who's been here representing it, and Shirley as well. And yeah, thank you so much for this really, really nice conversation. See you in the next one.